It all began when I found myself on the deck of an unidentified military vessel. The gentle sway of the waves and the vast blue surrounding me contrasted with the uncertainties that filled my mind. The extraordinary sum of money had been the decisive factor in accepting this mission. But now, sailing toward the unknown, I questioned the real motivations behind my selection. The instructions I received were minimal. Do not interact with the crew. Do not ask questions. Just wait. The mystery of the confidential operation weighed on my shoulders. The words of my former lieutenant echoed in my memory. A competent soldier keeps his damn mouth shut. During my military service, everything seemed simple. Orders were orders, and I followed them without question. The line between right and wrong was clear until I was sent to the battlefield, where it quickly dissolved into shades of gray. I know they told you not to talk to the crew, but I have to ask, for God's sake, what motivated you to accept this operation? A deep voice interrupted my thoughts as I gazed at the maritime horizon. I turned to find a sturdy man, clearly military by his posture, though his attire did not resemble the rest of the crew's. There was something in his eyes that conveyed experience, like someone who had seen more than anyone ever should. I fit the profile, I replied curtly, maintaining the discretion I had been ordered to keep. Do you even know where we're going? He asked, a slight tone of disbelief in his voice. I shook my head, suddenly feeling exposed by my own ignorance. That's probably why they chose you. My name is Victor. I'm the commander of this operation, he revealed, extending his hand in a formal gesture that seemed out of place in such a mysterious setting. I studied him with heightened attention. He wasn't what I would have imagined as the mission leader. His physique suggested more of an enforcer, someone with brute strength rather than strategic thinking. However, his age seemed fitting for command, and there was a calculated coldness in his demeanor that could only come from extreme experiences. I'm Dylan. I assume you're going to reveal our exact destination? I asked, allowing myself a small indiscretion. Down below, he answered simply, pointing to the deep turquoise ocean stretching in every direction. I couldn't help but let out a brief, nervous laugh. I've never served aboard a submarine. If you think I can assist you in underwater combat, you've picked the wrong man. An enigmatic smile appeared on his face. That's not it, Dylan. We're going deeper, all the way to the bottom of the abyss. His poetic response piqued my curiosity more than any formal briefing ever could. Why? What's down there? Lemuria. What else would it be? He exclaimed with an enthusiasm that seemed rehearsed, as if announcing a long-anticipated revelation. The legendary sunken city? That's real? I asked, still expecting it to be an elaborate joke. No, of course not. At least not in the historical sense, Victor explained, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret. The Lemuria we're visiting is a facility built shortly after World War I. Foreseeing a nuclear conflict, a bunch of filthy rich people wanted a safe refuge. They decided the ocean floor was ideal. Naturally, it had to be kept absolutely secret. Only a select group of government officials knew about the project, and since then, they've taken the secret to their graves. My expression must have betrayed my skepticism, because he continued before I could formulate another question. The base remained hidden until some documents resurfaced recently. Apparently, we lost contact with the facility in the 70s, along with all the technology developed there. Can you imagine what kind of advancements they were hiding in the depths? No, I admitted honestly. The concept of a secret base at the bottom of the ocean sounded like something straight out of a science fiction novel. That's why we're going down there. We're going to reactivate the station and retrieve as much information as possible. At that moment, two other men approached, both with the unmistakable posture of trained soldiers. Victor introduced them as Pietro and Daniel, the tactical engineers assigned to accompany us on this enigmatic mission. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken uncertainties. When the vessel finally anchored at a specific point in the ocean, Victor led us to the right side of the deck, where a peculiar submersible awaited us. The vehicle resembled more of a lunar module than a conventional submarine, with a visibly reinforced hull designed to withstand extreme pressures. The technology seemed far too advanced to be public knowledge. Have you ever been to the depths? Pietro asked as we were escorted into the submersible. His casual tone contrasted with the tension surrounding us. I shook my head negatively, as Daniel did beside me. The uncomfortable truth was that we were four strangers, each holding only fragments of information about a potentially fatal mission. The risk of leaking ultra-secret data made me consider a disturbing possibility. We might be eliminated after the operation was completed. The ship shuddered as we were launched into the ocean. The metallic noise reverberated through the hull as we submerged, but surprisingly, a strange sense of calm overtook me as the waters fully engulfed us. The descent was faster than I expected, with the sunlight gradually giving way to total darkness as we sank toward the unknown. Casual attempts at conversation emerged between us, but we quickly returned to silence with each creak of the external hull, adjusting to the immense ocean pressure. I stayed tense throughout the journey, watching the navigation instruments that indicated our increasing depth. Only when I felt a sudden halt did I realize we had reached the bottom of the abyss, where Lemuria awaited us with its long-forgotten secrets. I consented when Victor ordered me to move forward, and Pietro made contact with the station dock without much difficulty. Using the facility's monitoring systems, we were able to check the internal conditions before risking our entry. "The internal pressure seems acceptable," Pietro reported, analyzing the data on an old monitor. "The life support system is partially compromised, though only a few sections still have oxygen. We can try to repair them, but I can't guarantee results." "Any sign of life?" Victor asked, leaning over Pietro's shoulder. "I couldn't say just based on this, but without oxygen, what could there be?" Pietro replied with a shrug that couldn't hide his concern. "Still, stay alert. Let's finish this quickly," Victor instructed, checking his equipment one last time. My ears hurt intensely when the hatches finally opened. I instinctively raised my rifle and took the first step into Lemuria. The station was operating solely on emergency backup systems, presumably powered by underwater geothermal activity. This meant we had little more than emergency lights to guide us through the unknown. The others followed closely behind. As we exited the decompression chamber, we found a surprisingly orderly corridor that resembled more of a 1940s hotel than a secret underwater base. Although the metal walls were exposed in some areas, it was clear they had made an effort to make the place livable, almost cozy. On both sides of the corridor, several metal doors lined up, each marked with simple numbers and letters. Between each door was a framed photograph of one of the original inhabitants, mostly scientists with serious expressions, some military personnel with determined looks. Their faces seemed to watch us as we walked down the silent corridor. "I don't see anything," Daniel commented, his voice amplified through his suit communicator. "Neither do I," agreed Victor, scanning the environment with experienced eyes. "The communications should be in Section 7H, along with the command center, somewhere central in the base," Pietro explained, consulting a digital map. "We should prioritize life support. It should be just ahead in Section 3C. The meticulous decoration gave the station a darker, less welcoming atmosphere. Paintings on the walls showed earthly landscapes, as if they tried to make the inhabitants forget they were isolated in the ocean depths. I suppose times had changed since then, but I couldn't shake the feeling of walking through an underwater mausoleum. "This is it," Daniel announced when we opened the door to the life support systems. Unlike the well-decorated corridors, this compartment was little more than a generator room with complex machinery and bare metal walls. An elaborate system produced oxygen directly from the water through electrolysis, essentially an unlimited source of breathable air, when it was functioning correctly. There was also a detailed map of the facility on the wall, with indicators of habitability and biological activity for each section. All of them marked 0. "No sign of life. I believe we're safe for now," Daniel stated, after analyzing the control panels. I slightly relaxed my guard, but remained vigilant. A facility of this size, abandoned for decades, held numerous potential dangers, even without considering hostile survivors. "This shouldn't be too complex to fix," Daniel said as he examined the damaged components. "It almost looks like someone intentionally sabotaged it, but they didn't do a very efficient job." "All right, let's move on and fix the communications. Can you handle this on your own?" Victor asked. Daniel nodded confidently. "Then let's go." Leaving one of our engineers behind, we continued toward the command center, walking through identical corridors that formed an underwater labyrinth. So, if the station went inoperable but no one left, where are the bodies? I asked, voicing the thought that silently haunted us. Who knows if they left? They could have escaped and stayed anonymous, Victor said, but his tone lacked conviction. Along the way, I briefly examined some of the doors that had already been opened. They were dormitories and offices, all well decorated to look livable, with personal items scattered around and unmade beds, as if the occupants had left only momentarily. Books on shelves, family photographs on desks, even cups with dried coffee residues. If the crew had left, they clearly didn't care to take their belongings, or didn't have time to do so. By the time we reached the center, about 20 minutes had passed. The station was impressively vast, large enough to house at least 500 people, all of whom had simply disappeared without leaving a trace except their abandoned belongings. Then we passed a door marked differently from the others. Z9, it indicated, a considerable jump if the compartments were labeled alphabetically. Additionally, the compartment was classified as laboratory, with a partially faded biological hazard symbol. Should we investigate? I suggested, my curiosity momentarily outweighing caution. Later, we need to repair communications and transfer the data, Victor ordered, keeping us focused on the original mission. But when we tried to proceed to the command center, we found a sealed door that had been deliberately fused shut. Someone had used industrial equipment to ensure that no one could access that area. Someone really doesn't want us to have access here, Pietro commented as he set his toolkit down. But I can get through, just give me 10 minutes. I suppose we can check the laboratory while that's happening. There might be valuable information in there. Victor finally gave in to the temptation of discovery. We both entered the laboratory. It was impressively spacious, with rows of metal tables and hundreds of jars and equipment that neither of us could identify. There were also typewriters and what appeared to be primitive computers, probably intended solely for message decryption. The tables were all vacant, except for one covered with a large plastic tarp in the center of the room. Something bulky was beneath it, with vaguely humanoid contours. Victor went to gather documents from a side table, while I headed straight for the occupied table. I stepped back in shock as I removed the tarp. What lay beneath was a disfigured being that I could barely recognize. It was approximately human-sized, with pale, smooth, almost translucent skin. Where its head should have been, there was only a cavity filled with numerous long teeth that resembled blades more than chewing structures. The only other appendages were 4 robust legs, ending in sharp bones, and multiple openings across its body that resembled gills. But what truly alarmed me were the multiple bullet wounds it had suffered, all penetrating only about an inch due to its thick skin. The apparent cause of death seemed to be a massive puncture to its abdomen, but what caused it, I didn't know. "What the hell is this?" I asked, trying to comprehend the horrific creature before me. Victor turned, holding a stack of yellowed documents. His face expressed momentary confusion as he observed the grotesque creature, but he didn't seem as surprised as I expected. "Listen to this," he began, reading one of the documents. May 19th, 1973. The runners infiltrated sectors A and B. We managed to seal the sections, but it won't hold for long. Ballistic projectiles have limited effect, seemingly only slowing them momentarily. The electromagnetic cannon proved moderately effective at eliminating the runners, but with only one still functional, we cannot contain them completely. We recovered one of their bodies. Preliminary findings indicate that they are anaerobic creatures. They filter oxygen directly through their multiple gills and possess thick skin and unbreakable bone structure that... He interrupted the reading, flipping to the next page. It continues just describing their anatomy, but look at this. They only retreat when the pursuer appears. As far as we know, there is only one of them, but it has proven immune to all weapons. If it breaches the blockade, we need to evacuate the station. He finished reading and looked at me. "What the hell is the pursuer?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I don't know, but we..." Before I could finish my sentence, the sound of fans broke the silent atmosphere, and with that, our radios activated simultaneously. "Hey, this is Daniel. I managed to reactivate life support. Don't remove your masks. It will take a few minutes until the air is breathable." "Understood. Meet us at the command center," Victor said, exchanging a worried glance with me. We covered the mutilated creature again and went to find Pietro, who had already managed to break the seal of the command center door. The room was a circular area with numerous communication equipment and workstations. But what immediately caught my attention was the floor, covered in small whitish fragments of what appeared to be old wood. I crouched down to examine one of them, only to realize in horror that they were shattered human bones. "Hey guys, I think I found what's left of the crew," I said nervously, the reality of the situation suddenly becoming clear. "What the hell is this?" Pietro exclaimed, shock evident on his face. "We'll be fine. The creatures must be dead by now. Connect the transmitter to the communications, and let's transfer all possible data," Victor ordered, maintaining his composure. Pietro started working with Victor while I kept watch over the compartment, the weapon ready for any surprise. I continued reflecting on the creature on the table. According to the records, it had been there for decades. But if that was true, why hadn't it decomposed? And where were the others? And what, exactly, was the pursuer? I examined some of the documents Victor had collected, but one passage stood out on the last page. The writing was hurried, almost frantic. May 30th, 1973. They damaged our evacuation systems. The handful of remaining survivors is cornered. We're trying to send a distress signal, but the surface isn't responding. The only solution found is to flood the station with carbon dioxide. It doesn't eliminate the creatures, but it seems to put them into indefinite stasis. Our engineers are already on their way to disable the life support systems. The command center is operating on reserve power, so we must hold out until rescue arrives. Considering the scattered bones, it seemed like the rescue never came. I could hear the fans working through the recently reactivated life support system and reflected on the preserved yet ancient corpse. As I began to piece the puzzle together, another call came through the radio. "There's something here with me. I can hear them in the walls," Daniel warned, his voice rising in panic. "What are you talking about?" Victor asked, pausing his work on the data. As soon as the oxygen level increased, I started hearing banging inside the sealed compartments and walls. At first I thought it was the pipes or something, but then they started growling and... Wait, what is... Oh God, I'm seeing... A brief scream was heard before the radio went silent, and Daniel didn't respond anymore, no matter how many times we called his name. "Dylan, come with me. We need to help Daniel," Victor ordered, grabbing his rifle. But before we could start, we heard muffled growls coming from the corridor, some from the opposite end. Whatever Daniel had seen, it was approaching in mass. Then, some openings in the walls appeared without compromising the outer hull, and the first of the horrific creatures emerged, identical to the one we saw in the lab, but alive and moving, its sharp teeth gleaming under the emergency lights. "Let's contain them. Pietro, make these communications work now," Victor shouted, positioning himself. "I'm on it," Pietro responded, his fingers working frantically on the controls. Victor and I took position in front of the damaged door and raised our rifles. A dozen creatures advanced down the corridor, with more emerging from the openings in the walls. Their gills pulsed as they absorbed the fresh oxygen pumped into the station. Before we could open fire, the corridor was filled with pale monsters moving at a frightening speed. "Where the hell did they come from?" Victor asked, adjusting his aim. "They were sleeping. The air woke them up." "We did this," I replied, realizing the fatal mistake we had made. We unloaded a barrage of bullets, most hitting the creatures, but some fired past the target, piercing the walls. Luckily, the outer hull was too thick to be penetrated. Our weapons were far more powerful than those used by the station's former occupants, capable of mutilating the creatures enough to neutralize them. But for each one that fell, two more seemed to appear. "There are too many of these bastards," I shouted over the gunfire, switching out an empty magazine. "How much time do you need?" Victor asked over his shoulder. "It's already transferring. Let's get out of here," Pietro shouted, disconnecting the transfer device. But escaping was easier said than done, and soon we were overwhelmed by the number of creatures. Pietro joined in and emptied a magazine into the horde with limited effect. One managed to breach our defense and jumped from the wall to attack Victor. With a single bite, It shredded the flesh of his arm. He let out an agonizing scream as he fell. I rushed forward and fired directly at what I assumed was its brain, bringing it down with a spray of viscous fluid. With that, each creature froze. For a brief moment, the whole station sank into an oppressive silence. Then we heard a loud, sickening growl coming from the distant corridors. It sounded almost human, but with a frequency too low, emanating a mix of excruciating pain and fury. After the echo subsided, each of the pale creatures retreated into various openings and compartments of the station, as if in a coordinated retreat. "What the hell was that?" Pietro asked, reloading his weapon with trembling hands. "The pursuer, I suppose," Victor groaned as he tried to stop the bleeding with a makeshift tourniquet. "But we won't stay to confirm." We hastily returned to the decompression chamber, planning to destroy the life support systems before leaving for good. Turning a corner, we found long bloodstains presumably belonging to Daniel, along with bullet marks on the walls. His rifle was on the floor, empty and damaged. "Where did they all go?" I asked, checking every side corridor. The station had fallen into a sinister silence after the creature's retreat. We paused momentarily to orient ourselves, when the silence was broken by a grotesque crack that reverberated through the environment. Although the echo made it hard to pinpoint, it seemed to originate from the direction of the decompression chamber. We raised our rifles and proceeded cautiously. Turning another corner, we found dozens of the creatures, all dead and torn apart. At the end of the corridor stood a large humanoid figure, its back to us. It was the pursuer. It was taller and more robust than any human, with disproportionately long limbs. It was holding one of the creatures in its abnormally extended arms, which ended in little more than bone blades. The creature was still writhing in its final agony. Pietro tried to aim his rifle at the figure, but I signaled for him to stop. Based on the notes we had read, projectiles would be ineffective against it. But despite our silence, the creature seemed to sense our presence. It turned around, still holding the pale creature. Its face had little more than two massive black eyes and a deformed opening where a mouth should be. Its whole body was covered in visible red veins, pulsing as though transporting lava instead of blood. It emitted another growl as it tore the creature into pieces, before dropping the fragments of flesh and starting to run toward us. Pietro raised his rifle again and began firing as Victor and I retreated deeper into the station. "Pietro, for God's sake, run!" I yelled, realizing that the shots weren't slowing down the pursuer. But he was paralyzed by shock, only able to keep his finger firmly pressed on the trigger until the magazine was emptied. By that time, the creature had already reached him. It effortlessly sank its hands into his torso and lifted him as if he weighed nothing. Pietro let out a brief groan, but he had already passed away before he could even comprehend what had happened. Still, his death provided only a minute of distraction for the creature, giving us insufficient time to escape. We wouldn't outrun the pursuer in speed, and we both knew that. As we passed by one of the open compartments, Victor grabbed me with his uninjured arm. "Get out of here, bomb this place," he instructed before shoving me into the compartment. Then he opened fire, hardly hitting anything beyond the wall. But he wasn't aiming at the creature. He was only trying to draw its attention. "Run!" was the last thing he said as he retreated away from the decompression chamber, drawing the creature away from me. I had been given a chance to escape, but at the cost of Victor's life. I allowed myself only a second of hesitation before running to the decompression chamber and our escape vessel. My footsteps echoed through the corridors as I heard Victor's distant screams, followed by the final silence. I sealed the hatch and did my best to operate the submarine with my limited knowledge, my trembling hands gripping the controls. I cast one last glance through the small window, wondering about Victor's life. Then I left Lemuria behind, alone. The journey back was filled with silence, interrupted only by the hull adjusting to the decreasing pressure. The weight of what I had witnessed remained on my shoulders. The mission had been completed, but countless questions lingered, and I feared the answers would be scarce or deliberately hidden. On the surface, I submitted my mission report and was generously rewarded, as promised. Victor, Pietro, and Daniel had all perished in the ocean's depths, all for information that would remain classified forever. I handed over the recovered data, but I doubted it would be used for the good of humanity. Part of me fears that we were never sent to recover ancient research, but rather to confirm the existence of those dreadful creatures. Now that we have confirmed it, what will be the next step? Will they try to capture a live specimen? Will they study the stalker for its regenerative capabilities? What they plan for the future, I do not know. But I fear that, in exploring the ocean's abyss, we have awakened beings that should never have been discovered, and if they are brought to the surface, it will mean the end of life as we know it. Sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night, I could swear I hear the same horrifying growl that echoed through Lemuria's corridors, a reminder that some things must remain in the depths, and that our human curiosity may be our greatest enemy.